Hi everyone, welcome back. In the last video, we made our application more modular. We separated this nav bar and this search bar component from our app bar component. In this video, we are going to learn about hooks. And believe me, hooks are one of the most important topics in React. So the first question that arises in our mind is that what are hooks? And believe me, hooks are very simple in React. And hooks are nothing but simple JavaScript function. Let me write it over here. Hooks are just JavaScript functions. So if someone asks you what are hooks in React, just say hooks are nothing but simple JavaScript functions. And in React, all the hooks start from the word use. So for example, use state, use effect, use memo, let's say use id, and there are lots of hooks. So in this video we are going to learn about this use state hook, but before that let us build something. Let us build a counter that we saw when we initialized this React application. So do you remember that counter that we saw when we initialized this React application? So let's try to build that counter. Okay, so how do we build that counter? Let me first initialize a counter variable with value 0, and let me render it over here, this counter, and let me make a and let me make a button that will increase the value of this counter. So let me make a button. This button will increase the value of counter. This doesn't look like a button, so let's style this button a bit. So class name padding 1, be background, let's say slate, and let's make rounded Excel. Now this looks like a button, and let's give some padding so that it looks nice. Class name padding, let's make it 10. Okay, so now let's write a handler that will increase this counter value. So to write a handler in React, we write on click. What we want when we click on this button, we'll call this handler, let's say handle increase button. So handle increase button, and let's write this handler over here, const handle increase button, an arrow function, and let's write it will first increase the value of this counter, and it will print this value. So let's print this value. So let's see whether this works or not. Fingers crossed. Increase 0. Nothing's happening, so there is a bug. Let's see why this is not working. Instead of doing this counter +1, let's do counter ++, and let's see whether this works or not. So the value of counter is increasing in our console, but it is not getting updated here. So this is a problem in React. See, the value is increasing in this console, but it is not getting updated over here. To handle such cases in React, we have something known as state variables. So the question is, what are state variables? So state variables are special variables in React. Let me write the definition. State variables are special variables that trigger a re-render when their value changes. When their value changes. So what are state variables? State variables are special variables that triggers a re-render when their value changes. Okay, so what are state variables? State variables are special variables that triggers a re-render when their value changes. What is a re-render? For now, you can assume a re-render like a reload. So it reloads the whole component. So what we want whenever the value of this counter variable changes, it should re-render this component. And to achieve this, we have state variables. So let's convert this JavaScript. So now let's convert this JavaScript variable into a state variable. So to use a state variable, first we have to import a hook that is called useState hook. So how do we import a useState hook? So import curly braces, right, useState from React. So we are getting this useState function or a useState hook from this React library. Notice something over here. When we are importing this useState, we are using curly braces, but we are not using curly braces when we are importing this navbar. Do you remember what does it mean? It means that this useState is a named import and this navbar is a default export. We discussed in the last video. I hope you remember it. So now let's learn how to use this useState. So first of all, you have to write const, then first of all you have to write const and then an array that contains the name of your state variable and a function that will update the value of this counter variable. And let's call this function as set counter. Set counter equal to useState and pass the initial value. What was the initial value of our counter variable? It was 0. So let us put 0 over, let us put 0 over here, 0 over here, and this is how you initialize a state variable. So let me explain this a bit more. So we have a counter variable. The initial value of this counter variable is 0 and we have a function that will update this counter variable. So now let's use this function to update this counter variable. So how do we use it? Instead of doing counter plus plus, let's use set counter. And in this set counter, what we want to increase the count value by 1. So counter plus 1. So basically this function updates this counter variable, and we know whenever the value of state variable changes, this whole component, this app component will get re-rendered. So let's see whether this works or not. If I increase button, it is increasing. Okay, so the value is changing, and when the value is changing, the whole component is getting re-rendered. So let me show you how this function is getting re-rendered. Let me write a console log re-render. Re-render. So first, okay, so we wrote a console log re-render. Now let's see what is happening. So I am clicking on this increase button. So basically what is happening, first the value is getting updated and then a re-render is happening. First this value will become 26 and this whole component will be re-rendered. So this is what a state variable is, and this is how we use a useState hook. So let me summarize what we have discussed in this video. First, we discussed what are hooks. So in React, hooks are nothing but JavaScript function, and all hooks start from this word use. For example, use state, use effect, use memo, use context. There are so many hooks, but the most important ones are use state, use effect. You will see everywhere. These two hooks are widely used in React. So first we discussed about hooks, then we discussed about this state variables. What are state variables? State variables are special variables in React that triggers a re-render when their value changes. And we also learned how to initialize a state variable. So to initialize a state variable, we use a useState hook that React provides us, and this is the syntax of initializing a state variable. We write const an array, it contains it contains the name of your state variable and a function that updates this state variable. Here we pass the initial value of your state variable, and to update this state variable we are using this function. In the next video we are going to discuss another very important hook, that is useEffect hook. So this is it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Thank you.